Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 190 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, the great baseball player, catcher, coach, manager Yogi Berra once said, "You can observe a lot just by watching." You can observe a lot just by watching, and I have observed a lot just by watching photographers photograph. As most of you who are listening know, I guess because I probably beat it like a dead horse, I've been teaching photography for a long time. And most of that time was spent teaching in a classroom or a studio. I'd sometimes have the experience of working in the field with students, but it didn't happen that often. Certainly not often enough during the time that I was teaching college level photography classes in the Chicago suburbs. But I'd always noticed photographers out there in the world and watched them photograph. And I'd see them both when I was making photographs and when I wasn't. And it was always interesting to me to see how photographers reacted to a given scene or a given situation. And what's been really interesting to me is spending significant time in a tourist area, the Tuscany hill town of Cortona. Some of you may have seen the movie or read the book Under the Tuscan Sun that takes place in Cortona, Frances May's book. But the hill town of Cortona is a pretty heavily touristed town, partly because of the Under the Tuscan Sun book and movie. And so being able to watch photographers make pictures of the place that I've been able to call home for the fall semester for a couple of years here and again coming up in the next fall. And I've been teaching for the University of Georgia's study abroad program there, and the apartment that we rent is just above the town's main piazza, Piazza della Repubblica. So I get to see people photographing there all the time. And those people come with all kinds of equipment, and I'm sure that you'll have noticed, as I have, the enormous increase in higher end cameras, even among the most casual photographers out there. And I've got to admit to a guilty pleasure, and maybe you guys have this too, and that is that when you see people photographing a building a couple of 100 feet away and they have their flash turned on, in other words, our ability to think through the processes of photography is likely to be a little bit more sophisticated than that. Or, I also have to admit, occasionally glancing over and seeing that the mode dial is set at intelligent auto mode. And that they haven't taken it off that, or likely haven't taken it off that. I suppose I'm reading a lot in and, I'm being a little bashy here. Maybe that's a whole nother podcast, right? But there's one thing that I'll share with you that I see people doing all the time that makes me kind of crazy. And that is how people hold their cameras when they're making a vertical photograph. And I'd say like 80 to 90% of the time, you see people rotating their cameras so that the shutter release is on top and their right hand up above their left hand. And when they do that, when any of us do that, it puts your right elbow way out in space. And therefore, it isn't able to be tucked in against the body. If you rotate the camera the other way so that the shutter release is on the bottom, and your left hand is above your right hand, you can tuck your elbow in, your right elbow in, and also your left elbow in, and have a much more stable shooting platform. It also helps a lot if you put your left hand under the lens, cradling it. I often see a lot of people with their left hand, sort of rotating the focus or zoom dials and approaching it from above instead of cradling the lens from below. But if you do those two things, rotate the camera so that the shutter release is on the bottom and cradle the lens with your left hand instead of grabbing it overhand with your left hand, what you wind up doing is creating a much a more stable shooting platform. And it's something I share with all of my students when we cover camera handling. It's a pretty simple thing, but it's one of those little bits that help people improve their photography. Which brings me to the real meat of what I wanted to get at here, and that is what I see when I observe photographers as they approach a subject. Of course, I'm not likely to go up to a stranger in Cortona or anywhere else and ask them questions or offer suggestions about their approach to a subject. But when I'm with my Italy photo workshop students or my University of Georgia study abroad students out there photographing in the field, I try to work with them on trying to help them by doing just that, by asking questions and making some suggestions. So here's what I see a lot when I watch people photograph. I watch someone walk up to a subject, I watch them raise the camera to their eye, maybe zoom the lens a little bit, and then press the shutter release. Oftentimes, that's it. They'll look back at the subject a little bit, or they'll chimp at the LCD panel on the back of their digital camera and see that they got a picture, and then they'll walk on to whatever it is that they're going to photograph next, or become preoccupied by something else. So it's one picture and they're done. They have reacted to the subject and not done much of anything else to get to know it or explore it. So when I see my students do that, I try to ask some questions that can help them to get to thinking about what it is they're seeing and how it is that they're seeing it. First, I ask, why did you stop to make a photograph of that? And I don't mean in a kind of judgmental way, like it's not a good subject, but rather just identify the reason for stopping, because that can be really helpful to having you think about, oh, well, I stopped because, and then I ask them to start verbally describing what they see. Lines and shadows and colors and shapes and faces and interactions, you name it. Describe what's there. I ask them to make a list of nouns and adjectives that describe their reaction to a place or a scene or a situation, trying to help them nail down their emotional reaction in such a way that it can become their photographic reaction too. Then I get them to move. Moving around a subject, getting closer, moving far away from the thing or things that are being photographed. I encourage them to crouch, get down, also to get up high on a bench or a rock or a wall, to really stalk the subject in a way that will allow them to more fully engage it. In the end, what comes from this is a more complete way of seeing and responding to the subject. There are more photographs made, of course, than the one stop and shoot image, but the result is twofold. One is that they often get a better photograph than they would have gotten otherwise, but the bigger lesson is this: the idea of learning about a subject through the act of photographing it. By seeing more clearly, we learn more deeply, and the photographs begin to take on a greater sense of meaning and also become more of a personal statement about the things that we saw and decided to keep and then subsequently share in printed form or online or however. A variation on this is to use a tripod and stalk the subject before setting up the tripod and mounting the camera and framing an image. By slowing down that process, by slowing down the process of making photographs and making only a few select images rather than a barrage of them, you can be even more thoughtful about the process, more thoughtful about what it is that you are responding to and why. Golly, I gotta say, I don't know if I've ever been more excited about photography, and I'm sure that it's this intense interaction with students in the field that has led to that excitement, because for me, teaching photography has always been a big part of the way I learn about photography. And so as I teach, I'm learning more. And as I learn more, I become more involved in the medium, more excited about the medium. So I'm going to encourage you to head out with your camera and make a point to be more thoughtful and more deliberate about not just what you photograph, but how you approach the making of those photographs. I think you'll learn a lot. I know I do. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Camera Position, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the podcast about the creative side of photography.